Hello, everybody. My name is Algo. I have with me Joe,
Hi.
and today we are here to talk about Destiny. Just anything about Destiny. So, so
Destiny.
we, yeah. Let me real quick. I just remembered it there. I wanted to turn up Joe's microphone because Discord comes out pretty quiet on my end. Um, Sorry. Anyways, so Joe and I played a lot of Destiny. Um,
That's a gross understatement.
yeah, there was so for the longest time, I mean, we talked about a bit in the last podcast, and unfortunately, if you're watching this on YouTube, the last podcast had to be deleted. I still have it, and I may at some point do some work just to get some parts of it uploaded. But Joe and I had recorded our first episode of the podcast together last week, and there were some issues with it, some audio issues that came up, and so unfortunately, it's without a whole lot of work and like re-recording, it's not going to really be able to see the light of day. So, um, we may go back through at some point, and I may do some work to fix it or something. I don't know, but Joe and I we talked a bit about on the last podcast that him and I have been playing games together since like 6th or 7th grade, whenever it was that we met. And one of the like we really like to play Halo, and we really played a lot of Call of Duty Zombies. But I still remember now. I could be wrong on this, but I seem to remember Destiny was like 2013. Uh,
Um, that sounds about right.
yeah.
It was
2014.
tail end of Black Ops 2.
Mm-hmm.
Got into Destiny and spent more hours doing that than sleeping for
Yeah,
all of high
pretty much.
school, it seems.
It's the funny thing is, I remember where I first heard of Destiny because I actually had no idea it was even a thing for the longest time. Like Anthony had been talking about it a bit, but like I didn't hear much news about it. But then when it finally came out, Anthony talked like nonstop about it, and I think he even like stayed home a few days to play it. And so I was like, okay, I'll give this a try, and
Yeah.
I really liked it. It took me quite a few weeks to realize how sort of barren the base game was, but
Yeah.
at the time I loved it.
And the Destiny probably came out in September of that year, I
Yeah.
believe, and I was a Christmas noob,
Oh,
so
really?
I missed out on
Yeah, that's right. You came in.
basest of games.
Yeah, yeah. You missed out on the absolute nothing, the barren wasteland that was Destiny 1 base game. I think you joined like right around Crota, right?
Yeah, so I didn't know a a Destiny universe without Eris Morn.
Yeah.
Um,
It was much
best
better without her.
best. I missed the golden age of Destiny.
Yeah. We miss the Crota. They're summoning him. So yeah, it's I played Destiny. I think it was like day 2 after it came out was when I got it. So like really right around when it came out, and it was because of all the high praise Anthony had been giving it. And funny thing is, Anthony stopped playing it after about a week and like barely came back ever.
Yeah.
Um, but it's Anthony was a huge Bungie fan. Like it was like one of his absolute favorite company. I think even more than Blizzard. And so he was pretty
I
excited
mean,
for this.
rightly so. They did
Yeah,
do a little bit.
yeah. It's Halo 1, Halo 2, Halo 3, Halo Wars, Halo 3 ODST, Halo Reach. All of those were just such fantastic games. And I mean, you know, a lot of people say Halo Reach was the worst of all of those. I really loved that game, but I can understand some of the lesser points. But even when considering Halo Reach as being the not as great one, it was still really good. All of them were still so good. So this
I mean, when
Bungie,
when you when you sit there and you hit 4 home runs in a row, a triple's not too bad.
yeah, yeah, it's really not the worst. Um, So Destiny, it had some pretty big shoes to fill, but also considering Bungie was the team that kept hitting home runs, it's like, okay, is it really that big of a thing? Is it going to be that crazy that they may or may, like, no, of course they'll hit it. Um, but then it came out and they didn't. They tried to bunt while there was someone trying to get into home plate. And it was like, okay, you just got them out as well as yourself. um so,
I mean,
so yeah.
I think we're in consensus though. Destiny had many, many, many issues, but it was also some of the most fun we've ever had.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, Destiny is like such an anomaly to me because by every regard, it should be considered one of the biggest failures in video games that's ever existed, since something like No Man's Sky, or I mean, a lot of these games that come out and are completely broken, because Destiny was, it was Bungie, this amazing team. It was supported monetarily by Activision, this super wealthy company. Like,
it had the biggest gaming budget of any game ever, like $500 billion they spent on this game or something.
Yeah, it had so much going for it, and for it to come out and be something that people could experience the entire game within a week was an issue. Yeah, I mean, it just works. It's the old Todd Howard. It just works. So it was very frustrating, because it's like, this should have been just fantastic. But I guess I'll talk about kind of what the beginning was like. So when you first get into the game, you start off in this area where it's like, oh, you're just waking up because you were dead and you got resurrected by this thing called a ghost. And as you work through, you pick up some weapons and you fight the fallen, and you eventually escape in a ship. There was also like you go to the tower and you meet people, you meet the Vanguard, and you meet all of the class leaders, because there was you could play as a hunter, a titan, or a warlock, and all three of them were supposed to be very, very different. And I mean, they were pretty different, but they weren't that different. They still played generally the same. It was just they had like special abilities that were different. But then you would go through, you would level up as you went along, like actual experience, and you did all these levels. You went to you started on Earth, but then you would go to the moon, and you went to Venus, and I don't remember if you went to Mercury or not. I think that may, like, there were some things that took you to Mercury, but I don't remember if you actually went to there normally.
I don't think that was the generally playable area.
Yeah, I think that may have been limited to some PvP in the lighthouse and all that.
Yeah. For Destiny 1, yeah.
Yeah. But like, so you went to all these different locations and you went through the game, and the story itself was kind of all right, but the way that they implemented it wasn't great, because I mean, there's the most famous line from all of Destiny is the "I don't have time to explain why I don't have time to explain." And like, boy, yeah, all right, I guess. I guess we just don't need to learn the story.
For that.
Yeah, thanks, I guess. So that was when you meet this robotic. It was an exo is what they were called, but they were basically like robotic humanoids. And you meet her, and she like teleports in, and she asks you all these questions, and then your ghost is like, why are you asking all this? And she's like, I don't have time to explain why I don't have time to explain. And then she just leaves. It's like that meme, like appears, asks you a bunch of questions, tells you she doesn't have time to explain why she doesn't have time to explain, and leaves without explaining. And then like
but she still has time to send you a weapon in the mail.
Yeah, of course. Gift wrap it and go through all of the bureaucratic tape. So the finale of the game too was like the music for Destiny was fantastic. I'll still go back to listen to Destiny 1 music constantly, especially the music during the final story boss. But you end up like the final boss was so disappointing, because you go in to the Black Garden, which is this area that's like, oh, it's all of the all of the Vex, which are these evil robots. That's kind of where they're all being created. And you go through, you fight your way to the Garden's Heart, and then when you're there, you defeat 3 identical statues that you've also already fought about 10 times in the game, and then it ends, and they're just like, all right, you did it, goodbye. And like, oh,
do a confetti pop, and then
yeah, the little the streamers, and so
good job.
yeah, great, I love it. So it was very frustrating, and the one of the biggest issues was that all of those story quests revolved around going from point A to point B, defend the objective, which basically meant like stay in an area for a while or just kill enemies until a timer's done, or fight a boss. And the bosses were always just larger versions of the normal enemies. So you didn't really get much going on throughout the game in terms of gameplay. It was very similar. The gunplay itself was pretty good. Destiny's always had good gunplay, and it only got better going to Destiny 2. But other than that, there wasn't much going on. All of the story was like all of the meat of the story for you to actually understand why anything was happening was hidden in what were they called?
Grimoire.
Yeah, Grimoire cards, and that was an out of game thing.
You couldn't find them in the game. You had to go to Bungie.net.
Yeah, there was legitimately no way to access it from the game, and there wasn't. And you couldn't even do like, oh, there was a link in the game, because but Destiny 1 was only on console. There was no PC Destiny 1. So it was pretty frustrating, because there really wasn't, like, the story was pretty much non-existent. The gameplay was non-existent. They had strikes in the game, which were 3-man activities. It would matchmake you, and it was just a longer mission. Like, it followed the exact same thing of defend the objective, kill a few enemies, defend the objective, go to boss, kill boss, and that was it. The end game content they had was the Nightfall, which would actually add some modifiers and make the strikes actually very difficult. And if everyone died during the Nightfall, you would be sent to orbit and have to start over. And there were also raids, which were, I mean, there was only one raid at the start, but it was the Vaults of Glass. It came out after a few weeks, and it was, again, just defend the objective, and then, like, bosses had like 1 or 2 mechanics. So it wasn't amazing, but you know, it just works. So the end game basically at that point was just go and do bounties. Bounties were things where you would have to go back to the tower, and then you would have to interact with a bunch of different NPCs just in the area to pick up these bounties. And these bounties would be like, kill 10 of this enemy, or kill 5 of this enemy with grenades, or do this mission or whatever. And like, it was so disappointing. But there was PvP as well, and I don't even really know how the PvP was early on, because I don't think it was really that popular. But the difference between all the classes was that each class had their own special set of, like, they all had their own talent trees that they could go through, and so you could choose their own grenade. They had like different stat distributions you could do, and like different stats. Like there was like recovery, which would give you a better health recovery, discipline, which was better grenade, like grenades would come back faster, and intellect, which was you would get super faster. And actually, maybe there wasn't even recovery. It might have just been strength, which was get your melee ability faster.
Yeah, it was.
So it was just those 3 stats, and you could, like, each class had their own super and their own grenades and melee abilities, and the melee abilities were like just like sometimes one, like Warlock could get Devour, which would make their melee ability like give health back or whatever, but they were usually not great, especially because most enemies were very dangerous in melee range, so there wasn't a reason to get into melee. And then there was
always the go punch the boss joke every time.
Yeah. And it wasn't until much later that there actually was a legitimate reason to have a particular group member punch the boss in the first big expansion. But there was also like grenades, which were usually a bit more powerful. They would do some other stuff. Very occasionally, they would actually be super powerful, but otherwise, they were mainly just for dealing with ads. And then your super, which it took a very long time to get. You got more super energy the more enemies you killed. Killing enemies with the super could spawn orbs of light, and so then you could get orbs of light, which would give you more super energy. And they, they were whatever. The supers tended to be pretty good. The only really notable one, I mean, like they all had their own useful things. Like the warlock would shoot a nuke that would deal pretty good damage as one of the classes, or like the Titan could create a shield that people could survive in. But the most notable out of all of them was the solar warlock, which could get a self-resurrect if you had full super energy when you died. And that absolutely broke the game. But
it was not broken at all. What are you telling me?
Yeah, no, it's perfect. So we'll get into that a little bit later when we start talking about some of our memories of the game. But there was also like there were regular weapons. You had your primary, your secondary, and your heavy. The primary would be, I think it was auto rifle, hand cannon, pulse rifle, and scout rifle at the start. Hand cannon was like a pistol, and then like pulse rifle was a like a 3-round burst. Scout rifle would be a semi-automatic like long range thing, and an auto rifle would be fully automatic. Then for special, you had,
as one might expect.
Yeah, surprisingly enough, automatic means automatic. Then for special,
shotguns.
Shotguns, snipers, and fusions, I think.
Fusion rifles, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if there was anything else at that point. I don't think there was.
I don't think there was either. Fusions, everything else is pretty self-explanatory. Fusions were medium range, and they shot like a burst of maybe 6 or 8 projectiles that moved kind of slow, but
they actually had travel time.
Yeah. Not very useful in PvE. Also not very useful in PvP at the start.
Yeah. They at one point became busted, but for the most part they were pretty worthless. They also were like one of the only weapons other than rocket launchers which could not get critical strikes, which were, or I don't remember if they were called critical strikes or whatever they actually call them, but like when you hit an enemy in their weak spot, it'll deal extra damage. And every weapon could do that other than fusion rifle or rocket launchers. Which, speaking of rocket launchers, then in heavy weapons, you had either rocket launchers or machine guns. And machine guns pretty much stayed worthless throughout the entire time. I mean, worthless, quote unquote. They weren't terrible, but and there were some that were actually really, really good. But for the most part, you would choose a rocket launcher over a machine gun.
And I mean, for the most part, you'd only choose 1 or 2 rocket launchers over everything else.
Yeah. There were some that had like tracking, or that would have like the split rounds. And of course, there was a very famous one, which we'll get into later. But
and then everything had different rarities. There was white, which was absolute garbage. You could only get at the very start of the game. Then there was green. There was
the
green. The Kvastov. I don't remember what green was even called.
Hey, I think that was uncommon.
Uncommon.
Yeah, and then blue was rare.
And then purple was legendary. And then you could only equip 1 yellow exotic rarity of a weapon and 1 armor at a time, because they were the best of the best in the game. Yeah,
the exotics would have special effects. If it was armor, you would have something like this grenade that splits into multiple projectiles. Well, those projectiles will now seek, or you get a midair dodge, or all sorts of like crazy, actual somewhat gameplay changing. But sometimes they weren't very gameplay changing, and also sometimes those were the best ones, unfortunately. But then you also had the exotic weapons, which were really more interesting. Like you had a hand cannon that could deal damage over time. You had a rocket launcher way later on that created like solar grenades, like which were like just area of effect, like
The
for like 10 seconds.
Dragon's Breath.
Yeah.
And then eventually they upgraded that to basically just lay down fire over the entire map
Yeah.
instead of instead of shooting solar grenades.
Yeah, it suddenly actually became pretty cool instead of just being like, oh wow, you can't even tell when it's being used. um but there were some exotic weapons that were just, I mean, like, they were just the absolute best things that have ever existed. So those were the particularly the most useful ones were the Icebreaker and the Gjallarhorn. um so I guess I'll explain Icebreaker and then you can explain Gjallarhorn, because they're both worthy of big explanation. um Icebreaker was a sniper rifle that had regenerating ammo. And I mean, the problem is ammo in this game was set up so that you usually got primary ammo very easily from enemies. Like, they would just kind of drop it. They dropped all sorts of ammo and bricks, but then your special ammo for your special weapons dropped less often, and then your heavy ammo for heavy weapons dropped really, really rarely. So you but even then, the special ammo for your secondary weapons was also pretty rare. So and of course, like, you had to go out and get it. You couldn't just like absorb it or something unless you actually went out to it. So then you think about the idea of having a regenerating ammo sniper rifle, which already did more damage than most snipers in the game, but then also had, 6 shots and regenerated a shot every like 5 seconds. And it made it so that the whole idea of camping in any situation, in any PvE situation, was like, there was no reason to not do it. And it also allowed you to retain some ammo if you swapped to it, regenerated all the ammo, and then swapped to a different weapon. Not a whole lot of ammo, but like, if you had some other secondary weapon that you really wanted to use, you could get 1 or 2 shots of it back, so that you could do that if you were willing to just wait out the time, which sometimes you kind of needed to. So, and then the Gjallarhorn.
Gjallarhorn. Such a good heavy weapon that I had 3 of them at one point during year 1 because I didn't want to have to swap between my characters.
Oh, nice.
It was a rocket launcher, an exotic rocket launcher that, um, you know, all the rocket launchers did a lot of damage, but this one in particular not only had the initial explosion, but it also released heat-seeking secondary rockets, basically, um, on hit. So it did probably over twice as much damage as any other rocket launcher in the game when it was first introduced.
Yeah.
If there's an enemy in your way that you really want dead right this second, you just pull out your heavy and you just fire generally in its direction, because it had tracking on it, so it didn't really matter if you aimed very well. It had the best tracking in the game of any rocket launcher already, so it's just like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, it's dead. Whatever it was, for the most part. Even the raid bosses didn't stand much of a chance.
Yeah, it was good.
And because of its heavy use, if you were playing Titan, you pretty much were always running Ruin Wings. They were gauntlets that made heavy ammo drop like 8 times more
Yeah.
than the normal amount.
Yeah, it made Titans a really good solo class because you could get this heavy ammo so easily and then just infinitely use your Gjallarhorn. But even for multiplayer, it was very much required for any sort of group content. It was just, I mean, it was just a fantastic weapon. It was so good that I think that was one of the ones they didn't bring to year 2, right?
Right.
Because it was like, it was too good, and then they brought it back in year 3.
Yeah, they're just like, this game is ending. We're gonna release Destiny 2, so better not leave anything for people to complain about. Let's just put the most broken guns back.
Yeah. Well, and I think they're bringing it back for Destiny 2. So hopefully it's as busted. So, but that was basically the base game at the start. And I mean, over time, some more things got added. Like in, I don't remember if it was in Crota's End or if it wasn't until the first expansion, Taken King, when they eventually added in swords as a new weapon type. And I think they were only exotic swords, but they the most famous of them was the Raise Lighter, which dealt like the swords, they required you to be in melee range, but like you could block with them so that you would take a little bit less damage. Actually, no, could you block with them?
Yeah, you could.
You could, yeah. So yeah, that's right. Yeah, because that would use some of your ammo over time while you're blocking.
Yeah. So year 2 came around. They were like, we're getting rid of the Gjallarhorn. It's too broken. Let's add a Gjallarhorn that you have to get into melee range to use, because the Raise Lighter did about as much damage as the Gjallarhorn. They're just like,
yeah.
I mean, if you're that close, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I loved watching like Dado and his crew doing challenge runs with the Raise Lighter, because it would be like for all sorts of bosses where it's like, all right, let's just like the War Priest from from the Raid and Taken King, where they would just go up and just sit there spamming it, and it was like, oh, okay, yeah, they're just shredding him. So if you were safe in melee, like usually if you had like if you had a Titan with a bubble for you, like that would give you armor of light, you could just drop that down and then just sit there using your sword, and the enemy could do nothing about it. And swords had a lot of ammo, and unlike Destiny 2, your special attack as a sword with a sword did not it had no regeneration time. All it did was just cost more ammo, so you could just sit there spamming it if you wanted, as long as you had enough ammo.
And if you were, messing around wanting to go back to year 1 content with year 2 items, you could go to the year 1 raids, and the insta kill mechanics that that were supposed to wipe your team, you could do the block mechanic with your sword, and it would only take like a third of your health off.
Yeah, I think that was in Crota, especially when the Oversoul exploded, and you would just block and like, oh, okay, I'm fine.
Give a crap.
Yeah. So they added in the last DLC. So they originally at the beginning of the game, they released a DLC every like 4 months or so. And the DLCs were really not good. They did not have a whole lot of content. So they eventually switched to doing expansions, and they just did one expansion every year. And that definitely worked out a lot better because the expansions actually had a lot of content. But in the second DLC of year 1, they also released it was just a single weapon that had this, but then they well, I guess it was technically 2 weapons, but one of them was an exotic and it was kind of a burst one. They released Sidearms, which they were secondary weapons, but they had they basically shot like as fast as like a scout rifle or something, except they just didn't have the range, and also they did less damage. And they also had less ammo, but they also used special ammo. So there's a few negatives.
Yeah, the only upside to Sidearms in comparison to most other special weapons is you always spawned in with like 2 magazines full. That was one of their intrinsic perks.
Yeah, so you could have an easier time in like PvP with a sidearm. So they added more of those during Taken King. But did they add any new weapon types in Rise of Iron?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. The only other thing they ended up adding, like as a completely new mechanic, was a new subclass for every class. So at the start of the game, Titans could only be a Void Titan or an Arc Titan. Each of those had their own special supers. And then Warlocks could only be Solar or Void. And then hunters could only be solar or arc, and so the first expansion added in a void subclass for hunters, a solar subclass for titans, and a an arc subclass for warlocks. And Shadow Shot was the special ability for hunters, and it made enemies nearby your shot take extra damage for a while. And warlock or titans ended up getting the ability to make their punch make the enemy take extra damage. So both of these two things, the warlock ability wasn't, or the warlock subclass wasn't that interesting, but both of those two things allowed you to do crazy high damage to bosses. And it was pretty interesting because it meant you actually had to apply a debuff to the boss and deal extra damage. Like, you didn't have to because everything died easily enough, but that was it was a pretty interesting thing, a pretty neat idea. So then the other things that they added were during Crota's End, which was the first expansion, or I don't remember what it was actually called. The Dark Below was the first expansion.
Yeah.
They added in the raid Crota's End, and then during the House of Wolves DLC, which was the second one from year one, they didn't add in raid. They instead added the Prison of Elders, which was 3-man content. It was kind of like almost like a survival waves thing where you had to sometimes stand in certain objectives, which were out in the open. And then the highest difficulty ended with a boss fight that you had to do, and then like a boss fight that actually had real mechanics. And then year 2, they just added in the one raid, as well as there was some good world content like the Court of Oryx. But then year 3, it was the same thing. They added in a little bit of world content, and each time they added in some like new strikes. But then year 3 added in the Wrath of the Machine, I think it was called, raid.
Yeah. I just call it the Siva raid. I don't even remember.
So Joe was saying earlier he started playing in the Dark Below around Christmas time, which was the Crota's End raid. But then I stopped playing around year 3, or like before year 3, because that was when World of Warcraft Legion came out. And so I was very, very distracted by that. So Joe ended up experiencing a lot of year 3, primarily in the PvP scene.
Yeah. It was, I think it was the most balanced Destiny had ever been for the entire year. And then they released a single last update, like finishing off Destiny 1 right before Destiny 2 came out, and it just made it worse than it had been all year. And I'm like, well, that's fun. Cool.
Yeah, it's a good legacy for them to leave behind, I guess. So now that we've kind of got that explained, I wanted to go through that just to kind of explain what Destiny was and what was how it kind of progressed through and everything. But I want to take pretty much the rest of our time here to kind of talk about some memories of the game, because it was a very fun game despite the many failures. And at the end, we'll probably talk a little bit about some sort of gameplay things and what was good and bad, and like why this game may have been so fun despite all of its failures. But I think while going through these memories, you'll kind of be able to get an idea of why this was such a special game to us despite being such a failure, because we have so many memories of it and so many like positive and just fun times playing it.
Yeah. I think the best gameplay decision, best game design decision that Bungie had in developing this game was releasing it during our teenage years, so that we have good memories of it.
Yes, very much so. I think that was the best decision they could have possibly made.
I have a question for you, Alex.
Okay.
Off the top of your head, what is your favorite exotic weapon in all of Destiny?
So it's easy to say Gjallarhorn, but I probably wouldn't say that just because I mean, it was a great weapon, but
cliche.
Yeah, it's too cliche. It was just the one size fits all weapon. Let's see, that is a tough one. I think a top choice would have to be that weapon that came it was the exotic weapon that came from the Taken King expansion. Like, I think you could get it outside of the raid, but it was really good in the raid, where it was a scout rifle that had technically infinite ammo, but while it was at one shot, you never ran out, but like it did damage to you. But like did extra damage. I loved that one.
I don't think I ever got that one.
I got it, but then I didn't really do much with it because other weapons were just so much better. But it was a personal favorite. But I think probably actually my favorite weapon would be the sleeper simulant.
All right, that's a good choice as well.
Yeah.
Also, just like raw firepower.
Yeah, very raw firepower, but very satisfying, and especially fun when you would shoot it off in the middle of a Titan bubble, and it would bounce on everywhere in it, and then just blow you up.
Absolutely demolish you.
Yeah.
Maybe for me, maybe something no one else would choose, but bad juju.
Oh, bad juju was great. I love that weapon.
It was a full auto pulse rifle, right?
Yeah.
So it would do 3-round bursts, but if you held down the trigger, it would just keep shooting those bursts over and over. Its main perk was that if you got a kill, it would automatically reload the ammo from nowhere. Like it would just refill it. And the reason for me that it's one of my favorites is the very first time I played a raid with you guys, the only exotic I had unlocked was bad juju, so it was the only gun of any real
power.
Firepower. Yeah, so I was absolutely getting demolished in Crota's End, and I remember doing the bridge encounter. And I was just trying my hardest to stay alive while we built the bridge.
Yeah.
And it was I was rocking the bad juju, and that was
for whatever reason. Like, I've got memories of using bad juju in the War Priest strike. I don't know why, but the one of the ones I loved bad juju. I also always think of Red Death, which was another pulse rifle that gave health regen on kill, and that thing was busted. Especially on Crota, where you like specifically didn't regen health. You didn't want to equip that because you would have Gjallarhorn, but if you had a full group, you could, and just be no problem.
And I mean, it was one of the better pulse rifles because it hit really hard and flinched a lot of ads.
Yeah, that was a powerful one. Yeah, so that is tough and it's like there are other ones too. Like I loved the Dark Drinker, which was the Void version of the Raise Lighter. You did like a little spin move.
Yeah,
it was always fun.
I don't remember that one very often. I remember Raise Lighter just absolutely demolishing tougher enemies, and then I remember the Arc one would shoot.
Yeah, it would do like a range attack.
But I mean, I'm sure it was fun, but I don't remember that one very much compared to the because
it always got outshone by the Raise Lighter. It was like Raise Lighter was good AoE because you could just go and hit a bunch of enemies, and it was good single target because of its nuke. And so Dark Drinker just was Raise Lighter, but it took longer and did less damage. And so, but it was fun to go in and do like a little spin move. So one other this is kind of an unrelated thing, but it is related to just a bunch of different weapons. One of my biggest, and this isn't exactly a memory like this happened one time and I remember it. It happened all the time, and it was very frustrating. Was how long it took to access your inventory. So Joe and I played on Xbox 360. And this Destiny, yeah.
Wow, early 20s.
Destiny came out on the Xbox 360, the Xbox One, the PlayStation 3, and the PlayStation 4, and they had a special deal with Sony so that there was actually more content on the PlayStation version. But it also just ran quite a bit better on PlayStation 4. And the problem was on Xbox 360, and I think it was also kind of the same way on PlayStation 3, but on Xbox 360, if you wanted to change what was in your inventory, it would take like 20 seconds just for everything to load, because they wouldn't let you switch to them until you could actually see the image of everything. And I'm guessing they loaded all of the image, as well as, you have your 3D model that you can rotate around.
Yeah.
And so they had all of these things that they were loading whenever you paused. And so you couldn't actually interact with something even if you knew where it was in your inventory.
A loading circle.
Yeah. Just so if you wanted to switch a weapon, you had to wait that time. Or if you wanted to use a heavy ammo pack, you had to open up or pause and then move over one tab and then wait 15 to 20 seconds for it to actually load the images, and then you could actually consume your heavy ammo pack and use that. So while on PlayStation 4 you could just, like, in the middle of battle, take like 4 seconds, go do that, and then continue. On Xbox you had to, or on Xbox 360 you had to go hide and find a good spot to not have to worry about stuff.
Yeah, and then I wrote in the notes, I was, at least for me, right, when I was playing, my phone was so like out of sync with current technology that I couldn't have the Destiny companion app while we were playing. So every time I wanted to swap an item from one character to another, I had to do I had to spend like 30 minutes like going to the tower, putting my item in the vault, loading my other character up, going to the tower again, putting the item in my character's inventory, and then going and playing the content I want with the weapon or whatever that I was trying to swap.
Or even worse, if you had to get something from one of your other characters to the one that you were playing, and then you would have to do all that, but then come back to your main character. So just
and we're back.
Yeah. So that was Bungie had set this game up as sort of almost like an RPG, but with guns. And so different weapons were very important for different situations, especially if you were like super hardcore, super amazing at the game, you could get any content done with any weapon pretty much. But if you weren't the best people at the game, you needed to actually have these pretty decent weapons or the appropriate gear. And unless you wanted to just have a bunch of copies of weapons, which you had to level up weapons back during Destiny 1, so you would have to do a bunch of grinding to level it up. Unless you wanted to do that a bunch of times, as well as even just get the weapon, because it was very random if you would actually get the weapon, you had to go and go through all of this process of bringing the character that had it to the tower, leaving it in the vault, which was like your bank across all characters, and then going to the character that you wanted it on and picking it up. And that meant loading into the tower all those times, which, I mean, the tower was like an actual location. There wasn't any way to access any of that outside of the tower until, I don't remember when they added in the companion app, but eventually they did. And then you could do all that on your phone. It still took a while, but it was like significantly faster than needing to do it on the like go to the tower and everything.
Yeah. I also remember during year 1, the vault where you store all your weapons and armor and stuff had
so limited.
Had like 5 slots.
Yeah.
I mean, that's clearly an exaggeration, but
I think it was just like one page, which was like, like that would last you the first week. Unless you literally got rid of everything that you used or that you had picked up until you had like everything you needed. And like early on, no one knew what they would need to keep and what they wouldn't need to keep, but it was so much stuff that they would give you, and you couldn't do anything with it because you just were running out of vault space so fast. Like there were more exotics than there were vault space.
I have the companion open for Destiny 1 right now, and there are 108 weapon slots and 108 armor slots. I think during year 1 it was 80 slots combined.
Oh man,
all of that.
Yeah, that is tough. So there was not a whole lot of space. And like one of the other problems was, actually no, maybe not. Maybe I'm thinking of Destiny 2. Like, was there a need to put any of your consumable items in the vault, like any of your non-weapon, non-armor stuff?
I mean, you can.
Yeah, I can't remember if that was actually necessary at all, unless you wanted to like swap it to your alt characters. But there was also, speaking of that, there was I think you only could have like 25,000 glimmer or something.
That's still the cap.
Really? Maybe it was less than that. Maybe it was like 10,000 glimmer, because I remember they had to increase it at some point because it was really low. But funnily enough, exact same problem happened in Destiny 2, where they had 25,000 as the cap, but they also increased the amount of glimmer that you get, and so then people complained, and so they brought it up to 250,000, which is still sometimes not enough. But it is. That's a topic for another time, is the weird way that Destiny 2 followed the exact same problems that Destiny 1 did. But we can get into that another time.
I think now is a good time to talk about the raids and how much fun they were.
Yeah,
because it seems like we've been harping on negative things.
Yeah. There is, I will bring up before the raids, just because this does kind of tie into them with stuff like the Gjallarhorn and Icebreaker and like the exotics. I do want to quick tap into the loot cave. This was a very short time. Joe, I think it was probably before you joined in.
It was definitely before my time, yeah.
There was a location in the Cosmodrome, which was the Earth location, that was called the Loot Cave, and it was a special location where, for whatever reason, enemies spawned way more often, especially there was like special events that would happen where it was the enemy is moving against each other, and it was just like, and enemy factions would go and fight and everything. But for whatever reason, this cave spawned enemies really fast. So fast, in fact, that they, like, a lot of those enemies would be like even special enemies that would have they would have a special health bar, which meant they would have a higher chance of dropping stuff, but even the normal enemies could drop stuff. And what this meant was you could farm equipment, specifically exotic equipment, just by standing at this loot cave and shooting in and trying to kill the enemies, and occasionally going in to pick up some ammo. And I got like 2 or 3 exotics there before I got bored and left, but it was amazing. It didn't last for very long. I think it lasted like the first week of the game, and then it got patched out. But it was pretty spectacular, because you would see like 6 people on a rock out in the distance just shooting at this cave, and all sorts of things coming out and getting insta killed. But I mean, it was great for getting exotics. So now moving on to the raids. So the raids were interesting. They weren't super amazing. Year 2, when they introduced Kingsfall, was actually a pretty good raid, but Joe and I never really did the full thing. But raids were set up as 6-man content. So while the strikes were 3-man content, raids required, they didn't require 6 people, but the mechanics were set up so that you should have 6 people. And it was like, they were supposed to be like the pinnacle end game PvE content, where it was like, this is where everything gets truly tested. And each of the raids had mechanics where you could tell that was like this is where you're supposed to have 3 of the players do this and the other 3 do this, or like, do 2 and 2 or whatever. But the funny thing is, it almost felt like they designed these raids before they had designed how the game actually works. Because every single one of these mechanics you could cheese in one way or another. So what was your favorite cheese out of both Vaults of Glass and Crota's End?
Well, I mean, the one that sticks out to me obviously is the Atheon boss fight.
Yes, that was what I was going to say too.
Close second, I think, would be the bridge encounter in Crota's End, just flying across over top the death barrier.
So let's go through each of the raids and just explain how it was supposed to go and how you could cheese it every single time.
All right.
So Vaults of Glass.
I'm trying to remember the first encounter.
The first encounter was the outside where you were defending the 3 locations.
Right, and what's the cheese? I don't remember.
So the cheese was all you had to do
wait,
was
I
activate all of
remember.
them, and then you could just shoot all the enemies from a vantage point, and you would never have to
Yeah,
worry about it.
so
Plus, I think there was a way to
the
sneak
other thing,
into.
right? So you would get inside the each of the rings, and then you would drive your sparrow to another location, and the enemies wouldn't spawn in because you were in another location. But
Yeah, so you just waited like
it would
60
count as
seconds.
right. It would count as you standing in there still, because
Yeah.
none of the enemies came to.
Yeah, it was the way that those circles worked was that it was you would stand in them to capture them, and then the enemies, if they got in, they would recapture it. So as long as the enemies never entered it, it would stay captured by you. And so as long as you had all three of these captured for some amount of time without an enemy going into it, then you would be able to enter. So just by leaving, all the enemies would despawn and never respawn because you weren't in the area, and so it would just eventually open.
Cool boss fight.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure there was at one point a way that you could jump off your sparrow and sneak in, but I think they
Yeah,
may have patched
that
that
was
out.
also. I don't know if they did.
Yeah, maybe not. Um, so then there was a bit of like platforming, and then the second encounter was this very long, tedious encounter where it was just defend certain locations, and there were confluxes that would appear throughout the room, and there were Vex enemies that would slowly walk towards it, and if they got to it, they would try and sacrifice themselves. And I don't remember. I think it was like if a few sacrificed, you would die, but like I'm pretty sure like
Right.
one sacrificing would give you a debuff that you needed to cleanse or something.
Yeah, and then some of the Vex, when you killed them, would leave a pool on the ground, which also gave you that same
Yeah.
debuff. Uh,
So the funny, like, this one was one where it was like supposed to be set up like, because you have like one conflux in one location, then in another, and then you got two confluxes, and then the one conflux again, and then you got all three confluxes. And so it was supposed to be a, you keep needing to split your group up to defend each objective, but the enemies weren't really tough enough that you needed to worry as much about that. It was kind of tough to solo just because there were so many enemies, but you could solo or like 2 or 3 man it very easily.
and I think that was this encounter also broken by Icebreaker.
I think it may have been. I know Oracle's was, but I think
Definitely. Yeah.
I think that one was pretty broken by it too, because there was a location up top above the area where you could like shoot down from and get a good vantage point of pretty much everything, and like it was a wide platform, so if you couldn't see something from one area, you could just move along the platform and see it elsewhere.
Right, and the encounter started when one of the team jumped down, and when you jump down, you can't get back up. But so 5 people would stay up there, and one person just had to run around or sit in a corner.
Yeah, they didn't even really have to do anything, and if they wanted to, they could just go in and like, make sure that any stragglers don't get through or something. But Icebreaker, because this is the Icebreaker, if you don't remember, that's the weapon that had the infinite sniper ammo, so it's like it was really good. So then next was the oracles. Oh boy, good spam message. Dogehype.com, what in the world is that? Sorry, anyways, got a spam message in my chat. So the next encounter was the oracles, and the oracles would spawn in waves. I think it was a wave of 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, then 7. And there were set locations for these oracles to spawn, but what would happen was you would hear the sound, and that would be some location, and then you would have to go over to that location and shoot it. And if the oracles lasted too long, they would give you the debuff that you needed to cleanse, and then that wave after a minute or so would start over. And while all this was going on, you were also getting attacked by enemies. So it was supposed to be that it was like you slowly built up to larger and larger waves, and like it would be more and more dangerous as time went on. So and more difficult to keep up with. But once again, Icebreaker allowed you to just sit up top at the vantage point yet again and just snipe all of them, because Icebreaker could kill it in like 2 shots.
Yeah, I think there was one oracle location that where when it spawned there, you couldn't reach from there. So we had every time we did it, I remember two people sitting down, like literally right in front of where that oracle spawned,
Yeah.
and enemies would almost never pathfind over there, so they were just sitting there like waiting, like, all right, it's gonna spawn eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, they
All
were there
right.
ready to shoot it, and otherwise they were just AFK, I guess. And again, being up top meant that you completely ignored all of the enemies that spawned. So it was like it was so stupid. So once you did that, then you got to the Templar fight, which was an enjoyable fight because you had one person got to use the relic, which was like the shield thing. And so I would always be the relic bearer, and you needed, as the relic, you needed to build up super energy and then shoot your super at the Templar to break his shield, and then everyone could attack the Templar and deal damage to him.
And then during the Templar fight, he also spawned some oracles sometimes.
Yeah, so you would have to deal with them the same way as you always did. I don't remember what the cheese was for this guy, other than just he had low health, so you could just kill him with Gjallarhorn.
I mean, yeah, definitely that. I mean, I think half the time we did it just normally, like everyone running around on the bottom. And half the time it was just like, okay, everyone sit up top except for like two people, like Relic Bear and someone else.
Yeah, just have them there, and then everyone get your Gjallarhorns ready and just snipe from above, or even just use your Icebreakers, because why not? Early on, we never actually got to experience this, but early on there was a way that you could push, same thing existed on Atheon, you could actually push the Templar off the ledge with solar grenades. Because
and Dragon's Breath.
Yeah, because Bungie had the genius idea to make it that enemies would, like, every enemy would move away from solar grenades, because they would leave like AoE damage over time at a location. So it was like, yeah, that makes sense, make them move away, except they put that same thing on bosses for some reason. So bosses would constantly move away. And then you had the solar warlocks, which could use their super to give them a faster grenade regeneration rate. So then they could just sit there throwing grenades and pushing him further and further back, and eventually he would fall off the ledge and die. Like, the most boring way to defeat the boss.
Here is your loot.
Yeah, pretty much. So the next quote unquote,
I know it sounds like we're very disappointed, but we had a lot of fun doing this. Oh
yeah, it's because especially one of the best things about it is that this was supposed to be 6-man content, and Joe and I 2-manned most of this and 3-manned all of it very, very easily. And I mean, we would like regularly, like weekly, go through and 3-man it, because it was just so fun to go through and break it and just experience doing all that. So we sound disappointed. We sound like, we're like, how could Bungie do this? But like, I'm glad they did, because when year 3, again, I didn't play year 3, but if I did, I probably would have been kind of disappointed, because in year 3, they made it way more difficult to low man any of these raids. In some cases made it impossible to do it, but it was a shame, because some of the most fun I've had playing the game was going into any of these raids and cheesing them so much, and just experiencing what you're supposed to do with a fully coordinated group with just the 3 of us. So
after Templar
it was the Gorgons Maze.
Yeah. So
which was it was pretty cool. I mean, essentially Gorgonz Maze was just, you have like a maze, like a very difficult area. It's always the exact same maze, but confusing sort of area that you have to go through and find the exit to continue on. And there are these Gorgons that are traveling around that if they see you, they after like 10 seconds will kill you. And so you could kill them yourselves with like a lot of ammo and really good weapons, but then the rest of them would get stronger and be able to see you from further. So usually if you got caught, you would just take the death so that you could start over.
And in most cases, when we did it, we would just have one person get past the checkpoint, save, and everyone else would go to orbit and come back. Yeah,
you could very easily just do something like that. Later on, they ended up adding in, I think, did Night Stalker hunters have the ability to give themselves in the group invisibility, or am I thinking of just Destiny 2?
no, yeah, that was in the first game as well.
Yeah. So when Taken King came out, you could have a hunter give everyone invisibility past the difficult parts and then just go through. But like Joe said, most of the time you would just have one person go through very easily, and like that person might have the Mida multi tool, which was an exotic primary, which let you run faster. So they would just use that and then get through super easy.
Yeah, and then Arc Titan could sit in a corner for a second and turn invisible.
Yeah. Yeah, that one was nice.
Did I say Titan, Arc Hunter? Yeah.
All right. Yeah, Arc Hunter. But either way, it was very, very sweet to have that. So then there was like a bit more platforming, and then it came to the gatekeeper fight, which
The platforming there was always the most difficult part of the raid for me.
oh yeah, because there were all those the big drops and the platforms disappearing and everything. Yeah, that part was definitely pretty tough. So the gatekeeper fight was literally just, you have the gatekeeper in this, or you have the gatekeeper in the center, you defeat him, and then there are these rings that you stand in, and as long as no enemies move into them, it opens up a gate. You go into that gate, you kill the enemies there, and then you I think you just kill them and then you leave. I don't remember if there was the relic in there or not. I don't believe there was, not until the last fight. It's tough to remember though.
Kind of a blur.
Yeah, because I mean, Gatekeeper was really just a glorified trash fight, because you would go in both sides and kill all the enemies and then come back through, and then I think it was over, or there was like a conflux to defend at the very end, which wasn't very difficult. But unfortunately, some of my memories of this are getting kind of blurred from what the remake of it is like in Destiny 2. So I'm not 100% sure, but I do remember that Gatekeepers was super easy. So, and like, it was, again, if you had the Gjallarhorn, when you would go into those portals, you could very easily just shoot at the enemies in there and kill them and then just move on. Like, you didn't need to do anything. So you didn't have to worry about getting stuck in there because the enemies closed the gate. You just would go, you'd open up the gate, go in for 1 second, shoot a rocket launcher, go back out. Because you only needed to kill the special enemy, not any of the little ones. But then Atheon was the final boss, and he spawned like right after you finished Gatekeepers. And he was a pretty cool boss. He had this mechanic where, like, first of all, he was a giant minotaur, so he like was this big towering thing that would just shoot like purple missiles at you. And then he also spawned supplicants, which were harpy enemies that would fly towards you and self-destruct, which would basically kill you if they reached you. And then there were also he would teleport people. He would teleport 3 people. Used to be the 3 farthest people, and then it just became 3 random people. But he would teleport 3 people to to a different area, and they would have to. One person would pick up the shield from there, and then that shield would. They would have to use that shield to like cure people of this weird darkness thing that was constantly making them blind. They needed to, while inside this area that they got teleported to, they would need to kill enemies on the floor, and then they would need to kill oracles that would spawn in the area. And I think it was like a certain amount of oracles would spawn. You just killed them as they showed up. I think it actually was always 7, maybe, now that I remember it. And then
probably
after you killed all those, you went back through. The people on the other side would be opening up the gate.
And if you didn't open up the gate in time, then I guess you'd wipe.
Yeah, because it was like, I think they would still be fine in there as long as they were still alive, but then you wouldn't be able to do like hardly any damage to the boss.
Right, and I guess if you don't open it, he wipes you or something. Like, if you didn't attack him in time.
Yeah. There's also like, you got teleported to one side or the other. There was like the left side and the right side. So you had to open up the correct portal in order to get people out.
Right. So obviously 3 people get teleported every time. So how do you cheese it as a 2-man?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah. And that's where the self-res comes in. So as we mentioned earlier, Solar Warlocks had the ability to take a self-resurrect thing, which what that means is whenever they died, as long as they had full super energy, they could use their super while dead and come back to life with full health and shields and everything. But what happens if Atheon tries to teleport them, but they die before they can be teleported? Well, luckily, he doesn't teleport their corpse. He just doesn't teleport them because they're dead. So then what happens if they then come back to life after they were supposed to be teleported? Well, now they're back in the starter area.
Right. So
but
I would usually be the one who is the self-res warlock. So I would jump off the cliff, wait for the teleport mechanic to happen, self-revive, then open the portal.
mm-hmm. And so we were able to, one person on the inside use the shield, one person on the outside open up the portal very easily. And one other important thing about it is that when you were doing the damage phase against Atheon, when he, after everyone escapes the portal, you have 30 seconds of damaging him where you get your super energy and your grenade energy brought back to full like every second. So it was never a worry about not having full super energy by the end of by the time the next phase starts, because you would by playing the boss, you would get full energy.
Right, so you didn't have to do it in one cycle or anything crazy like that. You just they didn't even think about, oh, this could possibly be an issue.
Yeah, there's a reason why they didn't bring self-res warlock back.
Right. So you do the full damage cycle, you'd be doing as much damage as possible, and I think there's even a timer or something similar like that.
Yeah, there was a timer on the Time's Vengeance, and so at like 3 seconds left, Joe would jump off the cliff, and then pretty soon after, I would get teleported, he would self-res, and then we would continue again. And like the oracles were all above ground, but you could do mid-air attacks with the shield relic weapon, and it was like you would even track onto the oracles, so it was super easy to get them. And if worse came to worse, you could drop your weapon and or drop the relic for a few seconds to be able to shoot at the oracles if you needed to, but you usually didn't even need to do that.
Right.
So
I mean, clearly this sounds very difficult, and we didn't do it. I don't think we ever succeeded when, like, even during Crota's end.
Yeah, I don't think it was. I don't think it was until until Taken King that we succeeded.
Right, so we were pretty high level compared to everything else.
Yeah, it's like the hardest part about it would be just having enough damage in order to do it with two people. But like it was still possible. It just was more difficult. So that's why when we came back later in the next expansion, it became a lot easier to deal with. But then all the rest of the mechanics were still there, so it was awesome. So then Crota's End, which was the other raid that we would do, and I don't know if you did, but I soloed it at one point, like I think 2 times, but it's not very fun to solo. I liked it a lot more doing the 2 of us or 3 of us, including other Joe.
I don't think I ever did solo, but only because I couldn't get the movement down.
Yeah, there was
mechanics.
Yeah, on the first encounter, the maze thing, and then the Crota fight, the movement was like so particular. And I guess on the whatever the witch boss, I don't remember what that boss was called, but the one right before Crota was pretty particular movement.
Yeah. So the first encounter was what do they even call it? Like the pit of darkness or something?
Yeah, something weird like that.
And there were quite a few ways to cheese it. My favorite was hunters with don't touch me gauntlets. Because
you would like launch.
Right, so the don't touch me gauntlets are exotic gauntlets whose exotic perk made it so that when you get melee attacked, you turn invisible. And so everything only attacks you with melee, so you just sprint down like the hallway getting melee attacked and then just getting ignored for like 30 seconds. And like, okay, yeah. I don't even care about anyone.
I forgot about that one. That was so great. Yeah, it was, as a hunter, it was so easy to cheese the first boss. the first encounter by doing that, because like Joe said, every attack other than at the very end was just getting meleeed. So how this first encounter was supposed to work was that you go through, it's another maze sort of thing where everything was very, very dark except for these lanterns. And while you were in the darkness, not by a lantern, you were getting a stacking debuff that prevented you from sprinting. And at 10 stacks, it just slowed you to a crawl. So there were also a bunch of thralls, which were little enemies that come over and just slap you. And they do pretty low damage, but there was a lot of them. And they were all spawning like crazy. And there were also some cursed thralls, which would explode if you got too nearby, and those ones would kill you. But you could remove stacks of this by going next to a lantern, which would be light for a while, and then after about like 20 seconds, it would start to turn orange, and then it would blow up. And if it blew up while you were there, you would die. So there was a path that you went on where you followed the lanterns, and there were some pits here and there, but then at the very end, you would get to a defend the objective spot where it was just survive for a while. And then you could, after that was done, all the stacks of the darkness would go away, and you could cross a bridge that was built and then escape. And there were a few ogres which would shoot stuff at you, but there were also ways to cheese the last section, like different ways to go invisible. There was, I think, even a rock that you could just hide behind or stand on, because every enemy was melee other than the ogres. And so if you got on this rock and sniped the ogre, then nothing could hurt you.
It was like, I guess I can't get you.
But there were also, along with the cheese Joe talked about the melee not being able to do anything, there was also a weird bug where sometimes when you would melee enemies, it would launch you in a direction so you could kind of aim yourself. But there was also one of the lanterns, you could climb on some rocks nearby it and then quick jump up to a ledge, which would let you skip about 90% of the path. It was really tough to do. And you needed, I don't think certain classes could do it even.
I only ever learned it as a Titan. I don't think Warlock was at all possible.
No, Hunter was really tough, but I think it was possible. But yeah, Titan was the one that that was the only one I was ever able to really do it on, I think. For Warlock was who I what I soloed the whole raid with, but I had to go through the whole thing. And the thing is, even without cheese, it was still possible to solo. It was just a little bit more difficult.
Right.
But
the only mechanic was I actually get through.
yeah, pretty much. And you could have an auto rifle as your primary to deal with all of the thralls, and then you could have a shotgun for the few knights that spawned, or a sniper and just do close range sniping. And warlocks had ways to do self-healing, a bunch of different self-healing ways. Yeah, Hunters had the invisibility.
As Warlock, you could throw down a solar grenade, which did AoE damage, and you'd get hurt for the first quarter of a second. And if you just stood in the grenade, none of the enemies would come towards you.
Yeah,
because they're all melee.
Yeah, you would just sit there being invulnerable, essentially, because everything was just staying away from you. There were so many different ways that this encounter could just be absolutely annihilated. It was hilarious. It felt like a single player story mission sort of thing. It was that easy. Second boss was an interesting one. So the second boss was this encounter where you were supposed to build a bridge and then have everyone cross it. However, this bridge, in order to cross it, you had to stand on a plate that would build the bridge. And while you were standing on the plate, there were two totems that would start powering up. And once they powered all the way up, they would wipe the group. The way to prevent them from wiping the group was have people stand under those totems, and you could they wouldn't do anything. So you basically had one person on the plate, one person on one totem, one person on the other. Then you would have in order to actually stand on the bridge, you would have to pick up a sword which dropped from a special enemy that spawned on your side after a while. So you would have to kill that enemy, pick up the sword, cross the bridge, kill another special enemy there, and then survive for a while by yourself. And then eventually another one would spawn, so you'd have the second person pick up the sword, go across. Once you had 3 people on the other side, there was also a plate and 2 totems there. So then you would do the same thing in reverse. So the people back at home would get off their plates and totems, and the people on the other side would get on their totems and or on their platform and totems. And then you would keep the bridge built, and the 3 people would slowly work their way across. and then there were like some more enemies that spawned, and then the fight was over. But there were a lot of different weird ways to cheese this. One of them being like, you could, I think even just as two people, if you took turns going back and forth between, like, each person was assigned to one totem, and then like you would take turns standing on the plate and then running over to the totem, to your totem, while the other person went and ran over on the plate and then go over to the totem and everything. You could build the bridge that way. But then there was this really weird glitch, or not glitch, but this really weird cheese. Joe, I'll let you take over.
So for some reason, a lot of the geometry, like in the back where no one was supposed to really even focus, was like climbable. So you would get like up onto a ledge, and then you'd go like through a wall that didn't have any like collision to it. And if you killed the special enemy who dropped the sword, you could, if you got all this if you did all this parkour fast enough, you could get on top of the entire map, and then the sword gave you special like movement abilities where you could basically like jump for a little bit and then swing the sword, which would keep you in the air, and then your jump would regenerate fast enough to keep you up above the entire map. And there were supposed to be kill barriers between like the bridge and like the ceiling, but you could get high enough that you just overpassed the entire thing and it didn't even matter.
Yeah.
You just land on the other side and you would just win, I guess.
Yeah. It was pretty ridiculous. There was a different version that I think it only worked for warlocks just because they had glide, but there was another version where you actually would like be able to go without even, you either had to build like half the bridge or you didn't even have to build the bridge.
Okay.
And you could just kind of like run halfway there and then glide across and slowly parkour your way back up.
For some reason, they made it where building the bridge actually built some of the geometry before like you finished. So
it was bizarre. Yeah, it was, my favorite was the one where you would go all the way above the map, like, and just fly over, and like it was so ridiculous to watch, but it worked really well. So that was fun. So then the next encounter, it wasn't really an encounter, it was the thrallway, where there was a hallway where there were just a bunch of thralls that spawned, and there were also some shriekers, which were like these sort of turrets that would shoot tracking projectiles at you, and then when you blew them up, they would fire even more powerful tracking projectiles that would chase you around corners and everything, until they eventually exploded, either by hitting you or dying out after like 10 seconds. And so you had to like defeat these shriekers. It was very easy, very possible to do solo. It took a little bit of time and was kind of tough just because there was a lot of damage going out, but not too bad. You usually would just use a Gjallarhorn to take down the shrieker.
Yeah.
If you made it through fast enough, you could get a special chest at the end. But
yeah, which, did it ever give an exotic, or is that just more material?
I think it was always only materials, which was like, after the first few weeks, it was like, why even bother? And actually, I think we did solo this, or two and 3 man and everything while it was current, but
yeah,
even at that point there wasn't much of a need for the ascendant shards and whatever. So then the next encounter was like the will of Crota, or the voice of Crota, or something.
Yeah, it was just a witch. I don't remember her name.
Yeah. And so the witch was set up that you had to go to two sides. There was like a room, and it had entrances from the left and from the right side. And on both sides, there was a witch that you had to kill, and then a shrieker you had to kill. And then once both of those were dead, in the center room was the boss witch. And you had to kill her, and if you took too long, she would start singing, and after a certain amount of time, that would just wipe the group, guaranteed. But there were also like a bunch of really strong knights with swords that would like attack you and deal tons of damage, and just a ton of enemies.
And because Gjallarhorn was a thing, you could just run in, fire one shot, kill the witch. Maybe if you got lucky, the trackers would hit the shrieker too, and like take half his health out instantly.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, I got into the habit of most people who did this low man would get into the habit of going in with full Gjallarhorn ammo. Like usually they would keep like killing enemies and then wiping until they got full Gjallarhorn ammo. And then like if there were 1 or 2 people, go in, shoot all your Gjallarhorn rockets to kill the witch and the shrieker, and then any other big ads, and then run back out to safety, use an armor or an heavy ammo pack, and then go back in, go up to the area above those doorways where the enemies could spawn in the crystal room, and just shoot rockets at her. It was great, and it was very easy to do. Like the hardest part was just those shriekers. The projectiles they would shoot after you after they died would move pretty fast, so you had to run to be careful or to be safe. So
and
then we
after you've done all of that,
yeah,
you get to face the final boss,
which was
Crota.
very silly.
It was.
So,
that's true.
So Crota was a very interesting boss, and in theory, the design of this boss I think is fantastic. But it just there were too many ways that it didn't work exactly how it should have, and so it was very easily cheesable.
I think the Court of Oryx encounter was a lot more fun.
Yeah,
it wasn't
same here.
Really very reliant on like, oh, if you lose, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, Court of Oryx one was pretty nice. Yeah, same here, Firelord. I loved Crota. It was such a fun fight to do, especially because again, like it was very easily soloable or 2-manable or 3-manable. So the fight started where you were in this room and you saw all of these enemies spawning, as well as you saw Crota spawning through the window. And so you had to fight your way out. So there were all of these acolytes shooting at you, and you were not able to regenerate health other than through things like Red Death or certain class abilities, like class punch abilities gave ammo or gave health back, or like warlocks with Devour. So you would usually do something like that, but not always. And you could very easily just go through, kill all of these enemies, and then you made it outside. And on normal mode, you could pick up a chalice, which would only one person could hold it at a time, but it would give them health regeneration. So as solo, obviously, you would just pick that up and just move on with it. I
completely forgot about the chalice, actually.
Yeah, because I think we actually did this a lot of times on hard mode because it was so easy. So we probably did a lot of it without the chalice even being a thing.
Yeah.
But then there were like enemies that would spawn on ledges to the left and to the right. And then there were also a bunch of thralls in the main pit. So you'd usually have like a few people taking care of the ads on the sides. And then you would have 1 or 2 people go down into the pit, kill the thralls, and kill the sword bearer that spawns.
Better get rid of the rocket knights.
Yeah, because they would mess your day up. And then you would have one person. This was the thing I loved. You would have one person pick up the sword, and the coolest music would play. And it was so fun because you had like 30 seconds where like you had this sword and Crota he was this giant towering knight and he had his sword, and you go running towards him, and your damage, like your normal weapons could not deal damage to the boss, but they could take down his shield. And when his shield went down, he would like kneel down on the ground for a few seconds, unable to attack. And so you would have the sword bearer like running up there with his sword, while the rest of the group was shooting all of their shots at the boss to take down his shield, and he would kneel down, and then you would go in with the sword because the sword could deal damage to him as long as he didn't have his shield, and you would hit him with your sword and deal a bunch of damage and everything, and then you would get out of there. You would hopefully get him to get taken down a second time, and then you would go back in and get some more hits. And it was so satisfying because you get this really cool music, and you're like going off against this gigantic creature with your sword and just slamming him. If you didn't take down those rocket knights, you would get annihilated there. So that was one of the biggest reasons you would want to take them down. But you usually wouldn't be able to kill him in one go. And so then there would be Crota would eventually move to one side.
Crota would crotate.
Yeah, he would do his crotation. He would crotate over to one side, stand there for a bit, and then he would come back to the middle, and then he would crotate to the other side and then come back to the middle. he also, if someone died, he would spawn the Oversoul, which was like this thing behind him that you had to destroy, otherwise it would blow up the group.
Yeah, and in hard mode, if he got below a certain amount of health without instantly, like without you killing him right away, he would also spawn the Oversoul.
Yeah, it was set up so that it was an enrage, so that like at the very end of the fight, you basically had to, because like he would like chain spawn them. So you'd get to the end of the fight and you would have to be like, okay, quick, take him down, and so I can kill him before this thing blows up, which was pretty cool. But there was also like halfway through the fight, or just like after a certain amount of time, after he rotated twice, some ogres would spawn on the left and the right side, and so you'd have to kill them. Most of the time, most groups killed Crota before that even happened, but it didn't really have any bearing on the fight either. So yeah, so how do you do this with less people is the big question. And
Gjallarhorn.
yeah, that's anything up till solo. The answer is Gjallarhorn. You could have you would basically have one person hang out all the way in the back of the room with the Gjallarhorn, the other person pick up the sword, and then that person at the back just had to shoot the Gjallarhorn. Because remember, the Gjallarhorn would do its initial hit, and then it would create these little seeker projectiles, and so the boss's shield wouldn't be able to regenerate because he got hit by the rocket, and then a few seconds later, or like a half a second later, got hit by all these seekers, and they were all kind of chipping away his health a little bit. So he was constantly taking damage and never able to regenerate his shield. And so the person would just have to sit there and just spam Gjallarhorn rockets on him until he went down, and then and then the sword person would do their thing, because the damage to him with the sword would always be the same whether you were one man or 6 man. So it was very, very cool because you could go in and very easily and just 2-man this. And I think Joe, you and I 2-manned it. We also 3-manned it, and I think you 2-manned it with Joe Bartlett a few times too, right?
Yeah.
But then solo was a whole new thing, which was really fun, because you had to take down all of those knights, and you actually didn't want the Gjallarhorn because you wanted to have something like Icebreaker to be able to take down, or just pretty much Icebreaker to take down the boomer knights. But then
I'm just thinking of how Dado did it, and he just put a portal or a bubble in the middle of the bridge up to Crota, and he just like poked his face out and shot the Gjallarhorn, and then just sprinted at him with the sword.
Yeah, I love the way that he did that. It was so funny. But the other way was being a solar warlock, because you could have it that your grenades dealt damage over time, and so you would use your super to throw your solar grenades on the boss. While you basically would have the sword, there was a ledge to the right of the area that you could stand on where you were safe. You would throw your grenades at the boss and then get him to the point where he was just barely burning, and so that the burning would take down his shield. And then once you would go up there and basically be hitting him as your burn finished off his shield, and then you would hit him a few times, and then you would go away. And you might be able to do it a second time, but most often you wouldn't be able to, so you would just have to get 3 good hits in at that point and then move on. So the fight would take a while. It usually took about 4 cycles, but it was darn satisfying to do when it happened. Like when I finally killed it, I was like, oh, that was so fun. But frustrating up until then, because it was a lot of work. Definitely the easiest boss to solo in all of the game, or the easiest raised boss to solo in the whole game, though. I think of like people that did solo War Priest, that did solo what's the last boss in Wrath of the Machine, Axis.
Axis Prime.
Yeah, a lot of people still say that's like the toughest solo that they've ever had to do in all of Destiny. It's crazy. So that was like, those were 2 raids that we did that were just, they were so fun. They were just crazy fun. I loved playing through those and just blasting through them. So some other I guess we can move on to some other good memories. Let's talk about Prison of Elders. So the Prison of Elders
Welcomes you.
Guardian. What was that guy's name again?
Varix.
Varix, thank you. Yeah, Varix. We loved Varix. He had all sorts of quotes. He would, always, "Hello, Guardian. Dismantle mines, yes, or you die." And we always, yeah, I always loved the Psylocke. Oh.
Oh no.
But there's also like Joe and I, we had all sorts of jokes when we were young. Like we talked about the Wunderwaffe from Black Ops. We would start calling it the Wunderwaffe, and then it just became like a weird amalgamation of just a bunch of V sounds, and then we just started calling it the V. And so we could say the V, and each other knew exactly what we were talking about. But so Prison of Elders was another thing with Varix. We ended up coming up with a whole lot of, he's like, we'd go yes or no.
No, your choice.
Your choice. So Prison of Elders came out in the House of Wolves DLC, which was the second DLC of year one. And it was
the summer expansion.
Yeah. Yeah. It was supposed to be a big summer activity, and boy, it really did not last that long. But the Prison of Elders was set into multiple tiers, and it was, you would go into this area, you would fight enemies, survive for a while, probably do a few, like some objectives, like survive some stuff, and then you would end up going to like after you survived long enough, you would move on to the next area, and like at the very end there would be a boss fight. And I believe that rotated each week, other than the main one, which was a very high level one. It was supposed to be a replacement to the raid, where you fought against I can't remember
his name.
Yeah, I cannot remember.
The guy from the House of Wolves.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Let's see if I can remember. What in the world is the boss's name? Skolas.
Skolas.
Yeah, there we go. Sorry.
Kell of Kells.
Yeah, Kell of Kells. So Skolas was a pretty neat boss. He actually had like a few mechanics where you couldn't like in the first phase you could only damage him after you defeated a certain weird one of those purple guys, whatever they were called. Don't
remember those either.
Blanking on everything's name. But you had some enemies you had to kill, and then like he would start giving you a debuff that you needed to pass on to the other people in the group, and like it would kill you after 40 seconds. So, but it also put a debuff on you that you couldn't pick it back up again for a while. So it was impossible to solo or to two-man. To my knowledge, I think
until year 2.
Yeah, until year 2, where you could actually survive it, because
Yeah, that. But I was thinking that the debuff he could survive with the sword blocking was the Oversoul, but the one that I did the most was the
Skolas one. Yeah, same here. Then there were also like halfway through the fight there were mines you needed to dismantle, but in its original incarnation, enemies spawned every like 60 seconds, which was stupid because the enemies also had a lot of extra health, like they were bullet sponges. So you couldn't realistically kill them in time. So you just had to let them all be alive. Eventually they changed it so that they spawned at health thresholds. So then it became more reasonable because it was like, okay, this is the health threshold where now we kill the enemies. But the entire time the fight was going on, past like 75%, you were having to pass around this debuff. So it was like very, very chaotic. But we had a lot of issues with this, with all of the Prison of Elders. And the majority of it came down to lag. One of them was I kept getting disconnected, and they made it so that you couldn't rejoin during the middle of during the middle of the Skolas Prison of Elders for whatever reason. So I had internet issues. My Xbox, I found out later, it was my Xbox 360 had a tough time staying connected to the internet for whatever reason. So constantly getting the beaver disconnect error. But I remember one time too that we were at like 20% on the boss, and we had been working on it all afternoon. We were at like 20%, and then I got disconnected, and because there wasn't another person to pass the debuffs to, it was a wipe, and oh, that was so frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, all throughout the times that we had been playing Destiny, there had been quite a lot of internet issues.
Yeah.
Not just Prison of Elders, but I remember one time we were playing Crota and we were doing the Death Singer fight, I think it was, and just okay, I guess I can't fight anyone anymore. They're just standing there.
Yeah. Yeah, the servers were really weird, and like all three of us just had big internet problems for no reason. By three of us, by the way, I mean, so we had another friend who's also named Joe, and I shouldn't say had, we still have this friend, but he's in the Marines now. And he had the worst internet out of all of us. He had a lot of times where he would just like disconnect. Sometimes I think he actually was there, but like he just wasn't talking or something. Like it was strange, but
Sure.
he had a lot of disconnects with a lot of content. Especially the hardest would be we would do a Nightfall and we would get right to the end and then he would disconnect. Because I think too at that point they were still using dial-up. So if someone used a phone, it was lights out. But my favorite memory of internet issues was we were doing Prison of, now this may have been like later on in the first in Taken King they did a sort of re-release of Prisons of Elders, so it may have been that. But at one of these points there was whenever the boss would spawn, he would spawn in like this little bubble in the center of the arena, and like it would kind of like come out of the ground and close up and spin around a little bit, and then it would open back up again. There was this weird glitch where because Joe was lagging so much, he ended up somehow standing, like we saw him as it was closing, he walked into the spawner and then it opens up and it's just him standing there. Like,
the boss isn't even there. It's like, what?
Yeah, it was so weird. It was so funny. So it was Joe became the boss battle. But
and I think we won.
Yeah, I think so. But then in year 2, which was the Taken King expansion, there was the famous April update, which was one of my favorite content updates to the game because it brought back the Prison of Elders, but like, you know, it like tuned everything to your new level and also made the things that you get from it like useful, and it made it so that it was worth redoing over and over again. And Prison of Elders
for
was
a little bit.
Yeah, for like over and over again until you got terribly bored of it because there was a lot of limitations to it. I enjoyed it a lot because it was 3-man content, so Joe and I could go in and do it, and you could also do it with 2 people. Like I don't remember if it's scaled or not, but it was easy enough to do with 2 people.
Yeah, it was. It was also when they added like weird like stuff to your armor so that you could like add glowing lights and crap.
Yeah, there was all sorts of weird cosmetic stuff that came in. So the April update was it was like there wasn't a whole lot in it, but it was very fun still, just because I loved Prison of Elders, and so I liked the opportunity to go back to it. I think I liked it a lot more than you and other Joe, and I kind of forced you guys to do it quite a bit, but I appreciate that you guys let me.
I definitely enjoyed it because for the most part of year 2 we were not playing together, at least Destiny.
Yeah.
Because I didn't get the expansion for like 2 months after like Taken King was released, so you guys were sort of off, and I was like, okay, I guess I'll be here playing
I'll just be here.
Zombies. And then I mean, so April update came out, it was free content, so we all had the same stuff together. And it was quite fun. It was as if Taken King was just still the main content again.
Yeah.
Except they had like, okay, I guess we're doing these some more. It was I mean, it was fun. It was definitely fun.
It was pretty fun. There was also the one of the main one of the main like story, I don't know why I said story, one of the main gameplay paths, and this was throughout the entire game, but they just expanded on it more and more over time, was the Nightfall. So every strike existed as like a thing that you could play at any time, but there was a weekly rotation of the Nightfall, which I think there were some strikes that it couldn't select, but for most of the strikes it could get. And the Nightfall was essentially every enemy was buffed up to a really high level, would deal a ton of damage and take a lot more, they had a lot more health. But there were also modifiers. So like you would get, most modifiers were like negative, but there would also be a burn, which would cause you to cause all sources of damage of a particular type to deal extra damage. So like a void burn would make all void damage deal more damage. So usually you would want to switch over to void subclasses at that point and use void weapons so that you could do the extra damage. The best would be during solar Nightfall, because you could, for one, Gjallarhorn did solar damage, so you could do a ton of damage with that. But there was a very interesting exotic that came out for hunters.
Oh yeah.
Zalo Supercell Colt. Yeah, Zalo Supercell on Arcburn was great.
Yeah, Zalo Supercell on any burn was still pretty good.
Yeah, Zalo, I forgot about that weapon. That one was crazy. So hunters got this exotic, or could get this exotic called the Celestial Nighthawk. And
it was a helmet. It was an exotic helmet. I remember like basically just the week that it came out. I think it was solar burn on the Nightfall.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Solar Hunter subclass, their super was it was Gunslinger. So you basically just had a golden gun that you could shoot. It did big damage.
Mm-hmm. And I think it usually had like 3 shots. Couldn't do like critical strikes or anything. It was just it just did pretty good damage. It was great for PvP, but pretty decent for PvE stuff.
And then Celestial Nighthawk comes out, and the tooltip says Golden Gun has a single shot that can overpenetrate and does 6 times normal damage.
So you can see where something gets a little crazy there.
Right. So I think we actually did this the first week that Celestial Nighthawk was available.
Yeah, I think so.
You did three hunters all running the helmet, and the final boss of the Nightfall comes around, and we just all pop our supers, take a single shot at his face each, does the total damage of 18 shots from the super, and that's what doubled or tripled. I'm not sure by the solar burn.
Oh yeah. I think it was triple at that point.
So 18 times 3 is 54.
So a pretty good amount of damage. It was enough to kill pretty much every boss.
And if someone missed or something, you just pull out your Gjallarhorn.
Yep, because again, that was exotic armor, so you could still have your exotic weapon Gjallarhorn, and it was like you were unstoppable with this. Anytime a boss came up, you could, like, if there was a boss or if there was a mini boss or something, you just pop that and you blast them. So the burns were great. They're what made Nightfalls really fun, because you could go in with like really, really high damage weapons and just annihilate them. Tough thing about Nightfalls was that if everyone died, you would get sent back to orbit, which meant you had to start completely over. And so that led to one of my favorite strats, because they were not timed. You had an infinite time to do a Nightfall. There was one strike, the Valista Arc, the whether we wanted it or not, we've stepped into a war with the Cabal on Mars.
They always do.
They always do. So the Valista Arc Nightfall, there was a special spot where you could hide under the stairs and he couldn't hit you unless you peeked out. And so we would basically all three be into this hidey spot and peek our heads out with our icebreakers and snipe at him, and then if we died, the other people in the group would get ready to res them, and then we would kind of take turns peeking out and shooting. And it was very fun, but it took forever to do. But it kind of reminds me of hiding under the stairs in Mob of the Dead, where it took forever, but boy, did it work.
That was very disappointing when they updated it.
Yeah,
that became a death spot.
Yeah, that was a shame.
But we did get to a higher round legit than we ever did in there because we got too bored.
Yeah, we gave up on like round 50 there, and then later on we ended up getting to like 60s or something pretty easily. So that was a fun time. That was a good map. I miss Map of the Dead. I wish there was a way we could go back and play it without having to play the like user made one that has like all sorts of broken stuff.
Right.
So anyways, so that was a really fun thing doing Nightfalls. That was like the 3-man end game content. But there were also a lot of really good strikes. Like I remember there was the one that they added in Taken King where it was a guy with a sword, and he like the last boss was a knight with a sword, and he would come in and attack you like from the shadows, and then he would go running back out into the shadows, and so you had to kind of watch for him. He was real sinister. But most of the strikes ended up being just that the final boss was just a normal enemy with a bunch of smaller enemies. My favorite one is and always will be the Fallen will continue to claw at the walls of our city. The Devil's Lair. It ends with a giant servitor. That's what those things are called. It ends with a giant servitor boss. And has the best boss music other than the final boss of the story game. In Rise of Iron, they redid the strike, and he actually had mechanics. And then they also did a new version of the song, a metal version, which was awesome. So that was a fun one. But there was also I'll go on.
A lot of the raids or a lot of the strikes seemed to be redone at one point or another.
Yeah, they did a lot of redoing them and a lot of sort of sunsetting them, where they just kind of got rid of them because it was like no one really liked them, which was good. So that was the nice thing, is that Destiny was a game where over time it actually became really solid. Early on it was a huge disappointment, but it became they really did not fully give up on it. They actually kept working on it. Another strike which I very much disliked, but I did probably more than any strike just because of a certain thing that dropped in it, was the Will of Crota Omnigul strike. And
yeah. So the interesting thing about the Omnigul strike was she shows up like in the middle and then like runs away. It's like, oh, she's escaping. But if you for whatever reason have a lot of damage on your side, you should just like kill her right then and there.
Yeah,
right then and there.
It was so absolutely ridiculous because the boss, she would actually drop her boss loot if you killed her ahead of time. And so she would be in the start of the area, and it's like, oh, she's running away, get her. And so you would get her, and she would die. And you would get your loot. Right. And like she would reappear later on at the end of the strike. But if you killed her here, you could get a chance at whatever she dropped.
And they never thought of like capping her health loss.
Yeah.
Or anything.
Funny thing is, they actually still didn't cap her health loss. She just doesn't drop anything now in Destiny 2. Because they redid the strike in Destiny 2, and you can still kill her. But the problem is some of the times you actually have to kill her because she glitches out and doesn't disappear. But then she doesn't drop anything. It's nice. A whole mess.
So we had at that point spent multiple hours in a session. Just someone's got a Void Hunter, shoots their super to tether her so she can't escape. and takes a lot of damage, and then we just roll up on her with Raise Lighter and just
Yeah, just swing your sword. And the nice thing about Raise Lighter was that it had a lot more ammo than a Yellowhorn ever had, so you could very easily do all that and then kill some enemies nearby to get your heavy ammo back, and then just die and respawn. And the reason we did this is because she dropped the best pulse rifle in the game, the Grasp of Malok, and so we just would keep killing her over and over and over again to try and get this. And eventually I think we all three got it, but
yeah.
it was like it was worth it because it was in PvP, it was the best pulse rifle for its time, at least. And just in general, it was one of the best ones, so it was pretty useful. So there were other really good, speaking of weapons, there were other really cool non-exotic weapons. Like the exotic ones were cool, but for Crota and Crota's End, they introduced a few different like unique weapons. Black Hammer was one that was like the most popular one.
So broken.
Yeah. So Black Hammer was you may recognize that as Black Spindle from year 2 and onwards, or as 1000 Voices from Destiny 2. But Black Spindle or Black Hammer was a sniper rifle that had 3 shots, and if you got 3 precision hits with it, it would give you back those 3 shots. And the weird thing is, the later versions made it that you would get that ammo back from your inventory, not Black Hammer.
And Black Hammer pulled from thin air 3 new shots. And it was a legendary weapon.
Yep.
So you could still roll like Yellowhorn, or if you wanted to, an exotic primary.
Yeah.
And
it was any enemy that you could get a critical hit on, you would be a fool to not use a Black Hammer. Like it was ridiculous. It was so, because it also did a lot of damage because it was a sniper, and snipers were really good at that point. But combining that with having a sleeper simulant or a Gjallarhorn or any heavy weapon that was really good, and it was like, like even if you wanted to run like a bad Juju or a Red Death, you would still run Black Hammer because it was so good. It basically meant it was. Icebreaker was what you would use if you needed to do a lot of infinite sniping and the enemies didn't have precision hits. And then Black Hammer you would do if they did have precision hits. And of course you would want to use Black Hammer then because you could use another exotic. But I think that did also lead to the ability to infinite snipe with Black Hammer even if you missed, because you could go to the Icebreaker, regenerate ammo, and then go back to the Black Hammer and retain some of that ammo enough that you could get the 3 shots and then continue sniping. It was crazy. Yeah. So Black Spindle came out and it started pulling from your reserves, and it was more balanced.
From my memory, year 1 Destiny was a lot more stingy with ammo all around.
Yeah,
like,
so that things like Black Hammer were so much more important because of that.
The ads only drop primary ammo for some reason.
Yeah.
And then like once every 3 years you win the lottery and you get a heavy ammo brick.
Yeah. I remember a lot of times when we were trying to 2-man the second to last boss in Crota's End, and like our ammo packs were on cooldown and we didn't have any heavy ammo because we had died at some point, and so we're just going in, killing, like wiping out everything manually, like with primaries, and still not getting a single heavy ammo brick. And so then we would have to like take a death because we knew we couldn't kill the boss in time, and then come back and do that like 3 times, and then we would get like 1 heavy ammo brick. And it was like just so frustrating. So things like Black Hammer were very important for that. But there was also a different, like a primary weapon that came out a bit later in Taken King, that it was a pulse rifle and it gave you health regen, kind of like Red Death. So it basically made Red Death like worthless. Although I don't remember if Red Death was even carried over to year 2 or not.
I think it was.
Yeah, I think so. But this primary, I never got it because it came from King's Fall, which I never got to do, and I think Joe, you never got to do the whole thing too, right?
Right.
So we never got it.
Killed the final boss.
Oh, I don't think I ever. Actually, maybe I did kill the final boss. I don't remember, but it was it was a pretty neat weapon because it did give you actual health regen, and like there were some other pretty useful weapons. Like there were some rockets with tracking and everything, and some good snipers, but none of them ever got as powerful as Black Hammer. Speaking of King's Fall 2, again, that's a raid that we never got to do like the whole thing of. According to people that did it, it was really, really good. But I still remember. I think it was either you or other Joe who had asked me to join for a Golgoroth, or Morgoth. Sorry, a Morgoth. Or no, maybe it was Golgoroth. I don't remember. I think it was Morgoth. I don't know.
The ogre.
Yeah, the ogre boss.
I think it was Golgoroth. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think Morgoth is from Destiny 2. I think so. Yeah, Golgoroth. He was an ogre boss, which was a really cool one. You had to like actually like you had two people that had to tank the boss, like swap aggro and everything. But we were in a group that could never figure it out because there were a bunch of like, the term squeaker, where it's like, oh yeah, they speak pretty high pitched because they're just kids. There were a lot of squeakers. So we never ended up getting to successfully do that, but it was a cool raid from what I did experience, what little I experienced.
It was. But it was also incredibly infuriating when you had a bad team.
Yeah, because that was one of I think King's Fall was, especially the last boss, I think it was one of the most mechanically intensive and mechanically important raids that's ever come out. Since I think Last Wish is the most mechanically intensive bosses that require like 20-minute explanations.
Jeez.
So, yeah, that's the last boss in Last Wish is crazy. Someday I want to go through and actually do all of those raids and experience them before they all get sunset, but who knows? So there were a few other things. There was like Sparrow Racing, which a lot of people are always like, bring back Sparrow Racing. It wasn't that great.
For like the first 3 matches.
Yeah, it was an enjoyable thing. I enjoyed doing it, but it got to a point where it was like, what's the point of doing this? Like, you only had like 2 or 3 maps, and
yeah,
it was difficult to control sparrows, and so it was just like, why? Also, Joe, I think you wrote this here, talking about Dinklebot.
Yeah. So originally, our ghost companion was voiced by Peter Dinklage,
Mr. Tyrion Lannister himself.
Yes, and because he was too busy doing Game of Thrones, he was never able to do voice lines for any of the expansions. So after like the first 20 minutes of content, the ghost was entirely silent, even though he's supposed to be one of the main characters.
Yeah, it was a little jarring.
He was also very, he's a good actor, but he was not a video game actor.
Yeah, I think there was a mix of he wasn't a very good voice actor and video game voice actor, and also he didn't have good direction, or it may have been rushed. I mean, there was the classic one that you wrote down here, that we've woken the hive, was, it was a thing.
So when Year 2 came out, Taken King, and all of the voice lines in the game from Peter Dinklage were removed, and it was replaced by Edward Richtofen himself, Nolan North.
I didn't realize that was Richtofen too. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Nolan North is he's a really talented voice actor. He did a great job with Ghost. So it was, I think it was probably for the best. I still miss a lot of the Dinklebot lines. There's of course that wizard came from the moon. And it's in the walls. All of these, I mean, it's if you ever get the chance, take a look on YouTube, find out like the Peter Dinklage voice lines for Destiny 1, because they were not great.
There are some other memes that exist, like Samuel L. Jackson as the ghost.
Yeah, I love that. So for the last thing of our memories, I have a little bit of memories of this, but I stayed pretty far away from it. But I know you did a lot more of this, especially in year 3. So I'll kind of hand off the main lead here, talking about PvP, because that existed in this game, but it was not a focus.
It was definitely not. Especially year 1 was all over the place. Like the first, I never actually played when fusion rifles were like god tier, but
Mm.
I've heard stories where, well, at least um the the final exotic from Vault of Glass,
Oh
uh
yeah. Oh, the Vex Mythoclast.
the
Yeah.
Vex Mythoclast was like, it was a primary fusion rifle, and it basically did the damage of a fusion rifle and fired like an auto rifle. So it like
Yeah.
it was like a 2 hit to the body, like,
Yeah.
and so
It's
it had a time to kill of like -5 seconds.
yeah, it was ridiculously powerful. I was so excited when I finally got it, but I got it well after it was nerfed. And
Yeah.
funnily enough, came back in year 2 and was too powerful, so they nerfed it right away, and then became worthless again. And then they buffed it, and it became the most powerful weapon in literally every type of content, even better than heavy weapons. Um, so they had to nerf it again, and I think it's getting buffed again now. It's all over
Pretty
the
funny.
place. Yeah.
PvP had first year had a lot of different metas. Second and third year seemed very much the same for the entire time.
Yeah.
Uh, year 1, after fusion rifles got nerfed into the ground, and auto rifles were also pretty trash for all of year 1 after that. Uh, two-shot hand cannons, like every exotic in the game that was a hand cannon could two-shot anyone from across the map. The Thorn was everyone's bane at that time
Oh yeah.
because it did damage over time, so you couldn't regen your health for like 30 seconds almost after you got hit once.
Yeah, it wasn't a
And
lot of damage over time, but it was just enough that you weren't regenning, and so you were at low health permanently.
right, and so people got so mad at that, they nerfed the damage over time into the ground, where it's like one tick of like one damage, like literally one damage every tick for like 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Uh, and then they also added an artifact into the game that when you equip it, you took no damage over time from any source that was in PvP. Um,
So they're basically making Thorn just worthless.
right. I mean, I was playing Destiny 2 a little bit ago, like last week, and um, Thorn was still pretty fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
But
not too bad.
hand cannons are not very good anymore. um, and then year 3, or year 2 and year 3, it was basically just uh, fast pulse rifles were
Mm-hmm.
always the meta,
Yeah,
and
that was where
movement.
Grasp of Malak was perfect.
Yeah, which is why we farmed it for hours on end.
Mm-hmm.
Movement exotics were what came out and everyone was using, and I still enjoy Twilight Garrison to this
Oh,
day.
same here.
It's so it when you jump as a Titan, you can double tap the
I think it
crouch
was like the
button.
B button.
Yeah, and you did like a quick dash in the air, and Titans were already like the fastest class, even though they're supposed to be tanks. You could do something called Titan skating, which was like you jump and then like cancel it, and you just like go flying across the map basically.
Yeah,
Um,
it was pretty interesting.
um, Hunters were also very quick all the time, which was kind of their gimmick, but like
Mm-hmm.
the Shade Step was added with the Void uh, Hunter class, which was basically the same thing as the Twilight Garrison. You could just like do a
Yeah,
dash move,
yeah, a little dodge dash thing.
and then my favorite class in PvE, the Warlocks were kind of left to their own devices and didn't
Yeah.
really have any movement speed, but the Ram was added, which was a helmet,
Oh,
and
yeah, the
it
Ram was
gave
crazy.
gave a lot of armor, which made it so that taking headshots with snipers, like the lower damage snipers didn't kill in one shot to people wearing the ram.
Yeah, it was like, what were they thinking?
Like, the other classes to get that same type of effect had to be in super.
hmm
So
Yeah,
it was pretty fun.
warlocks were a bit wacky. I still like, even one of my most memorable things is that going into going into the Arc Warlock super in PvP was like a, all right, everyone get away from me, otherwise you're gonna die, sort of thing.
And people would run the ram with that, even though it was supposed to be for the void subclass.
Just so that they were like invincible while they were running
Yeah,
around.
right.
That's awesome. There was also something else that you wrote here that I remember, No Land Beyond, and this is kind of both PvP and PvE. This was a weird weapon. So it was a sniper rifle, but it was in your primary slot. And instead of having a sniper scope, it had iron sights. And it was also bolt action. And also, because it was a primary, it did pretty low damage. So you could shoot off a shot like every 2 seconds or so, maybe a little bit less than that. Yeah, definitely less than that, but yeah. Yeah. It was basically like that. And it took forever and it didn't do a whole lot of damage, but some weird, interesting glitch was discovered by someone at some point where you could reload cancel. And so you could shoot it like, like, like really, really fast. If you did this crazy button combination every time you tried to do the bolt action thingy. And so you could suddenly actually became a really good weapon. And because it was a primary, that meant it actually had some use in PvP because it used primary ammo. It was weird. It was a bizarre weapon. Yeah, there was PvP had some fun stuff, and it did have quite a few metas, but yeah, definitely. I think there was a small time when scout rifles were the meta, and then they were no longer the meta for the rest of the game because scout rifles just have had a troubled history.
in my experience, the last week I was playing quite a few matches. Scout rifles were what I was best at.
Yeah, I tend to find myself best at scout rifles too, even if they're not the best. They definitely feel the best to use.
I mean, it seemed like at least their time to kill was pretty comparable to everything else, and
that's good.
I was much more consistent with them than anything else I was using.
Yeah, I was never, even though it was always the meta, I was never a huge fan of pulse rifles. Just in general, I'm not a huge fan of them, but especially in PvP. Because I never, like, you, in order to make the best use out of it, you have to get the 3-shot headshot, or all 3 shots have to hit the head. And so things like Grasp of Malok I didn't mind because they were like, they shot so fast that it was hard to miss. If you missed one of them, you would miss all of them, but if you hit one, you would pretty much hit all 3. There's also the No Time to Explain, which I don't even remember when it came in, but that weapon was not very good, but it was an exotic that like every precision hit that would go back into your ammo.
So originally it was a legendary.
Oh yeah, because wasn't it like the Make-A-Wish thing or something?
Yeah. Or I think that was actually Boolean Gemini was the Make-A-Wish thing.
Oh yeah, I think you're right.
But No Time to Explain was given as a legendary in the Postmaster after he finished the story mode. But then there was a quest added that made it an exotic. So
yeah. So yeah. It was pretty neat, and it was, I mean, it was a joke on the whole what we were talking about early on, the I don't have time to explain why you don't have time to explain sort of thing. It was pretty silly, but it was also it was a fine weapon. It just wouldn't get used over any other exotic because you either had the Yellowhorn or the Raise Lighter. I don't even remember when No Time to Explain came out, but regardless, you had a really good exotic heavy and a really good exotic secondary if you didn't want that exotic heavy. So like wasn't even much of a point to it. So I think those are pretty much the majority of our memories. There's still a few things here and there. Like I didn't talk much about the Court of Oryx because there wasn't much going on there other than just I spent so many hours there just because I really liked it. That was the Dreadnought was the new zone they added in Taken King, and it was really fun. But there wasn't like anything going on there that was super noteworthy other than it was just fun. But I don't know, what would you say is, I don't remember if we even asked this at the beginning, but what was your favorite memory of all of Destiny?
I think two-manning Vault of Glass will
That's
always be
exactly what I was going to say.
because it was I mean, Crota's End breaking that was really fun, but it seemed like everyone did it.
Yeah, it was pretty easy to break that raid.
Yeah.
The Vault of Glass was special.
Yeah.
Especially because like we worked really hard on that.
Yeah.
It was Vault of Glass two-manning that was like I don't even remember if we got it on our first day or our first few days that we tried it. Like I think it took us a few to get all the movement down, but it was satisfying. So I guess as a sort of close this up thing, just talk about some gameplay, like things to take away from this as a game designer, as someone who's interested in game design, anything like that. One of the biggest things is that this game started off really bad, but because Bungie stuck with it and they kept adding stuff to it, and for the most part they listened to the people and like, you know, all the fans of the game, they listened to any sort of feedback. They put in new weapons, they added new quests and everything, new raids. I think they the game itself really became something great, kind of like a No Man's Sky, where No Man's Sky started off abysmal, and after 5 years now they have given so many updates that it's like, it is a fantastic game. It's a game I spent 100 hours in just on one playthrough, and I was like enjoying every moment of it. But you know, when it started off, it wasn't great. And I mean, I think the funny thing is, if the game started off with everything that came in year one at the start, it may have been enough to sustain for a short while, but still probably wouldn't have been enough to be considered like a good full game. So, you know, it's tough because I still have a lot of good memories and I'll never forget those. But boy, I also, there are a lot of negative memories that I have a hard time forgetting, like constant disconnects, just sitting bored, running around the Cosmodrome trying to get chests so I could have something to do. Like,
there wasn't much. Before you could buy materials.
Oh yeah, it was awful. You just would go around in a loop around a certain area in the Cosmodrome or in Mars or wherever, and just try and pick up chests and planetary materials as you went along. It was pretty miserable. But another thing that's kind of important about this is that this game very much relied on having multiple people to play it. And that's why I think the first, before the first DLC was so crappy to me, because I didn't have anyone to play with at that point. Other Joe didn't have the game at that point. You didn't have the game at that point. Anthony did, but he didn't play it anymore at that point. So I didn't have anyone to enjoy this game with. I would do just normal strikes here and there, and I wasn't good enough to do any solo, like Nightfall solo stuff. So I didn't get to experience hardly anything in the game that was like any of the actual difficult content. Not to mention, even if you don't take into account the difficult content, the regular content was very unfulfilling because I didn't have a reason. You know, I was just kind of sitting there doing the same thing over and over again by myself. Whereas when Joe and I were both playing, we could do Crota or Vaults of Glass however many times over and over again, but we'd be having fun because we were playing the game with each other and having fun together as friends. That's kind of where Destiny 2 is as well. It's like, it's a game that's really not as fun solo. It can be kind of fun as solo, but like this is an archetype, whatever, of game that almost requires you to have friends to play with or to make friends to play it with. Otherwise, you're not going to get nearly the full experience. So, another thing too, going into Destiny 2, they reverted a lot of the good changes and basically had another Destiny 1 launch with Destiny 2. So I guess that's another thing to learn, is that if you're going to make a sequel to a game, maybe include pretty much all of the things you included in the first game in terms of mechanics and like quality of life. It's one thing to want to change up the norm or whatever, but if people really like the Destiny 1 where it ended up, like, why would you go back and just basically launch with the same amount of content in the same way the game works as Destiny 1? Like, I don't know.
You have to spend the whole amount of time getting back to where you started.
Yeah. I mean, it took until Forsaken for Destiny 2 to actually become a good game, which is like very, very interesting because it also took until Taken King, the first expansion for Destiny 1, to become a really, really good game. So it's weird.
Yeah.
But there were still lots of good times. It's a fun game. It always will remain as one of my favorite times. But like, I think it is just, it's a very strange game because I will also never forget the disappointment, but over time, the good memories take over more and more, and those become the more memorable things. So it was a fun time.
Twas indeed.
So I don't know if you have anything else that you want to say, Joe. Any other things about Destiny or anything?
I would definitely, I wish there was a way we could boot it up again, but I'm not sure that would be financially responsible.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the tough thing, is it's like we would basically, I don't know if you still have your Xbox 360, or I guess, yeah, because you were saying you were just launching it the other day or playing it the other day. I don't think I don't even know if I have my Xbox 360 anymore, and if I do, it can't connect to the internet. So like I would need to buy a whole new Xbox 360.
I was playing on Xbox One recently.
Oh right, yeah.
I only have my hard drive of my 360 left.
Oh wow. This is crazy. So yeah, I think it would be tough. I would love for them to just re-release it, like even re-release it with all of its content, because I know in year 3 they ended up doing like a remake of all of the raids, and then or at least of Vault of Flash and Crota's End, and made them current content. So for them to basically just release that version in some way would be pretty cool. There's also always like Destiny 2, but Destiny 2 doesn't have the same memories that Destiny 1 had. It doesn't have the same feel. So it's tough. One of those things that you, I think, as much as I did not enjoy like any of The Office season 8 or 9, there was one line that Andy had said, and hopefully I can remember it, but he had said like, I wish there was some way you could know that you were in the good times before they were gone. And that's kind of what Destiny 1 was. I wish we could have realized how special that time we spent together was. Partially because of the game itself, but also partially just because, I mean, like you said, their best Bungie's best decision was releasing Destiny while we were in our youth, so we had the time to play it. So I'll always remember the good memories. I'll also remember the one time I threw my controller.
Bad ones fade mostly. But yeah, that's like the only one I really remember, but most of the bad memories have all faded, and they'll keep fading over time.